This afternoon we have a panel, and they're here to, they've coordinated a presentation for you that really stems from the need to address the fact that although Canada was historically, the small towns in Canada historically were situated around woolen mills and worsted mills, today that is not the case. And that being not the case means that very few farmers are interested in taking on the added burden of taking care of fiber or breeding sheep for fiber. Moving towards the scenario where wool fibers are important as the meat is taking a considerable amount of energy and thought and brainstorming. These are the questions that our panel have been stewing over and are solving, and they would like to share with you their ideas. We have today with us Dr. Helen Knibb, who is an adjunct and sessional faculty member at Trent University School of Environment, teaching in the Sustainable Agriculture and Food Systems BA and BSc programs. Her research includes wool cultures, regional wool histories, distribution of sheep breeds, and the wool ecologies and processing infrastructures of Ontario. We also have, Melinda Ramsey. She's the founder of Landmade, an organization that brings Ontario fiber farmers to the city so that the urban artisans, the urban makers can actually buy from the farmers. She raises sheep and alpaca on her farm using ethical and sustainable practices and is a driving force on many agricultural associations and is especially committed to fiber education. Jennifer, so now I'm doing my order. But anyway, Jennifer Osborne is representing EcoWool Canada, a small manufacturing company specializing in finding ways to use strong waste and unwanted fibers. EcoWool is well positioned to be at the forefront of product development using waste Ontario fibers. Finding a financial outcome for these fibers will help to encourage sheep farming and better care of finding the fibers. Lindsay Weaver, owner of Wool Grown Company, creates practical and market-ready uses for Canadian wool. Her wool focuses on wool's positive qualities as a sustainable and regenerative fiber in gardening, growing, and agricultural spaces to support healthy soils. So these four will present sequentially. Helen first. Which way do you want? Are you ready? Do you want to be second?
It doesn't matter to me. Doesn't matter.
Yeah. Okay. Jennifer second, Lindsay third, and Mel last. And hopefully there'll be time for questions after.
Yeah, thank you.
So here you are. You need to be right around here and there because we have a virtual session as well.
Okay, thank you. So I need to make sure I can angle my notes
as
well.
Good.
Okay. So thank you, all of you. I just caught the tail end of the session this morning. The passion in the room, the energy, it was absolutely wonderful. And I wish that I'd been able to join you earlier. That being said, my presentation is really inspired by research that was sort of tangential to the work that I was originally doing on the Ontario wool supply chain and reviving our wool supply chain. I kind of went down, the rabbit hole in terms of our wool history and our wool culture. I did not expect to be so engaged. I did not expect to be so excited by the richness of the material that I encountered. And I didn't expect it to be so relevant in terms of building an understanding of the issues that we're dealing with today. And it's funny, I just came across a quote from one of my favorite historians, Heather Cox Richardson, who said, "An inaccurate picture of what creates change prevents people from making good decisions." And so I'm looking at this not from the perspective of this is about nostalgia. We've lost this incredible infrastructure and incredible wool awareness. I'm approaching this from the perspective of this is a rich resource of ideas that we can draw on today. And I think it relates to the work that Mel and Jen and Lindsay are all doing in terms of working with waste wools, trying to sort of reclaim our wool culture, if you like. And it's about partnerships. It's about connection. It's about how we worked with the mills in the past. And I think it may also tie into the field trip that some of you made yesterday in terms of, seeing what our mills and our producers are actually doing. So the way that I have approached this is just trying to highlight some key themes. I can't jam it all in 15 minutes, but these are the ones that sort of came out for me in terms of, again, sort of connecting to my other panelists, but really sort of thinking about the importance of this extraordinary history that for the most part has gone undocumented and isn't talked about very much either. So I won't go through all these points in detail because I'll come back to them. But what I really wanted to sort of think about in this is how we look at patterns versus events. And I'm hoping that you might sort of find some of the patterns, you'll follow along in the presentation as we sort of pull these threads through. But to be honest, we had an astonishing wool infrastructure and an astonishing wool history. We have lost so much of that, and it's really unfortunate. Oops, throwing my notes away there. So our breed history, again, this is something that I think we have lost in awareness of. We have breeds from all corners of the world in Ontario. Some jurisdictions are known for being breed specific. I would say that we are renowned for having this diversity of over 50 breeds in Ontario. Our original stock came with United Empire Loyalists, but during the 19th century, we had very thoughtful, to use a contemporary term, curated waves of imported British wool breeds. We can trace back on the shipping records, we can trace back to the very farms that those breeds came from. They were selected by a group of wealthy individuals that we call the flock masters, who were renowned for their work on wool growing and sheep production, and for whom their work was really a sort of civic, it was like a civic responsibility. That was one of the driving forces. They invested huge amounts of money in terms of importing stock, and gradually our agricultural associations got involved, and so we were able to literally sort of distribute these fine lines of breeding stock through the backwoods farmers of Ontario, and essentially really began to improve from grade stock and scrub sheep to sheep that were really quite magnificent, and which won in many shows, many international shows as well. We were known for our long wools, and I think that is a really lost history. Our Cotswolds and the Leicester, we sold breeding stock to the United States. In fact, we sold so much breeding stock to the United States, it really affected the quality of our own stock here. And we exported our long wool for processing in New York State because we didn't, in fact, have the worsted infrastructure here to do it justice. And, I hate to say this, but that entire industry sort of was basically upended by the US tariff. So history does repeat itself as well. But we did have, as I said, this really sort of incredible diversity of breeds and crossbreeds. And the crossbreeding was something that was really encouraged. This idea that we could produce this Canadian type, the sheep that was a good fit for our region. Oh, sorry, let's go forward there. The theme of how we used our sheep in terms of regenerative agriculture is something that is recycling today in terms of, a renewed focus on how we approach farming and pasture-raised livestock production. What was very clear in the 19th century was that we used sheep primarily for wool, but also for land reclamation. And going back into journals like the Canada Farmer, there are actually even specific tables that suggest, you need X number of Cotswolds per acre in order to fertilize the field effectively. So it was a real science. And the other science that was emerging by the end of the 19th century that connects to Jen's work and Lindsay's work using waste wools, we used our waste wool and we used it well. And there is data, actually. I was looking at something from the Agricultural College in Massachusetts that was doing work in terms of applying waste wool mulch to fields and analyzing the N at 6, which is about where we're at today, I think. But, really sort of systematic approach to how we used wool waste. And in the United States, where they were importing merino from South America, there were actually botanists going out into the fields because those seeds were trapped in the wool waste, and exotic plants were growing in places they had never been seen before. So there's a fascinating history there to what was truly wool waste, not just good wool, which is our challenge now, that becomes treated as waste because we don't have appropriate markets for it. But as I said, this was talked about extensively in terms of how we used that byproduct from the mill, or fleeces that were not up to standard. And I wanted to just share a little case study, which is the Bird Mill in Bracebridge, because I think it represents a really wonderful little sort of cameo moment in our wool history, where we had small-scale mills that moved to mid-scale, but essentially had this extraordinary relationship with local producers. And I do really want to focus on that relationship because I think it is something that is precarious. I think it's very hard to build. I think it's a relationship today that puts a lot of stress on those who have mills and are trying to work with producers and educate producers as to the quality of their product. But this little Bird Mill, in one sense, I think is a wonderful example of what we had and what we've lost. And I'll highlight some of the features. The family, the Birds, came from England. They were expert. I mean, this was not sort of learning on the fly. They actually produced very high quality wool felt for billiard tables. They came to Bracebridge, set up a mill here. What was extraordinary was the degree of product diversity that they produced. So it was everything from, blankets and hosiery and socks to the fact that Bracebridge was in the Muskokas and there was a growing tourist industry. And so they catered product to that tourist industry as well. And I think what's so interesting is that they used all different grades of wool until the mill got to a certain size when what was produced in Muskoka was no longer enough, and they started importing fiber from Iceland, from the UK, and elsewhere. And that pattern, that is the pattern that we see in Ontario and elsewhere. It's that tipping point in scale when we sort of lose that connectivity to the community and the local farmer, and we shift to something else where increasingly the local production is marginalized or irrelevant. And the industrial scale mills were basically working almost exclusively with imported wools. So these small scale mills were so incredibly important in terms of what they were doing. And, one of the things that was said, this is the mill as it expanded, so you can see how it sort of grew. But one of the things that was said about Canadian wool product was that, in fact, nobody wanted to buy Canadian because it was seen as being the equivalency of homespun and sort of coarse and, for rural populations. And in fact, it was often sold as German or English product because people would buy it if it was presented as German or English. So, we had a real struggle with that issue of how do we educate consumers. And I think that's something that Mel's going to talk about is how do we build that base? How do we get people into this space of engaging and understanding that we actually do have product quality, and it's fairly extraordinary. This was a mill that also had a flexibility and a dexterity. It sort of come the First World War, it shifted almost all its production to army, military, blankets, uniforms. But previous to that, a huge part of its work had been making Mackinaw jackets, which, again, we have lost some of the woolen cultural products that might be synonymous with our wool culture. We've lost some of those pieces, unfortunately. And this mill actually kept going into the 1940s until it was really displaced by synthetics. One of the other interesting things about our mill history is that Ontario excelled in processing shoddy using wool waste. So we actually have a lot of skills in working with wool waste, and we actually imported wool waste to process here. And it was an important part of many of the larger mills. A lot of the mills, the small to medium, and in some instances even the larger ones, did work on this premise of having a sort of literal wool exchange. And, as I said, there was this incredible sort of symbiotic relationship between the wool owner and the mill producer in terms of, and the wool producer in terms of, each got something from this partnership, and it was a partnership, and it was also a social connection, and there was this ongoing sort of educational process in terms of product. I think one of the interesting things we found in looking at the European wool revivals is that when sheep farmers actually see wool product, they get very excited about wool. And one of the challenges has been that we've sort of divorced ourselves from the end product. And in this instance, in the past, there was that very real connection and that very real need for utilitarian woolen goods and household furnishings. I can't imagine a time when we'd be looking for 500,000 pounds of wool at one moment. This is the Rosamond wool mill in Almont, which was the industrial scale, and usually they work with imported wools. So this was actually quite a little finding that. And I included this picture because it was one of the only pictures I've ever been able to find of a wool owner operator. This is Mr. Thomas Bird in 1935. And there was just something that radiated from this image that I found very, very engaging in terms of, again, that relationship. So durability and this question of what was our fiber good for? And one of the things we were so much better at doing in the 19th century was, essentially matching product to purpose, matching wool quality and fiber quality to purpose. So we understood the functionality of our different wools. We didn't try doing things that they weren't well fitted to. And I've included this image because it's actually a rather lovely picture. This is a shirt that was actually made at the Bird Woolen Mill in the 1940s and used continually, and still more or less used. And the owner cut the sleeves off because the cuffs got a bit ragged. But the point being, our wool had and was honored as having this quality of strength, endurance. It was robust. It was outerwear. We celebrated that actually as strengths that were aligned with the ongoing search for Canadian character and character building. So our sheep breeds and our wool product were seen to be aligned with, in one sense, the people that we wanted to be or how we wanted to present. And there were huge efforts to engage the consumer in terms of this wool awareness. And I'm not sure that they were all terribly successful, but great efforts were made. And one of the other sort of key themes that happened from actually early on in the 19th century well into the 20th century was government intervention in terms of how do we make things better. And I think this is something we're all struggling with right now, is in the need to rebuild our infrastructure. How do we engage government and policy in terms of being responsive and helpful? And it was it's very interesting to look back on the studies and documents around wool, particularly from the 1880s onwards. But this pivotal study in 1911 by two commissioners, Dryden and Rich, one of whom was a wool expert, they did an international comparative study of Canadian wool to other jurisdictions that were somewhat struggling with similar issues. The outcomes from this study and the subsequent change in policy and direction by government were actually quite profound, because from this, we actually sort of engaged in international marketing. We developed standards in wool handling. We developed a marketing system to get our product out there. But most important was that originally they set up a large number of wool depots that were run by wool specialists who could help the local producer in terms of improving their wool quality. And that is sort of, I think, for many of us, the missing piece in terms of we have great quality wool of its type in Ontario. The issue is its condition. The condition, suffers because of winter yarding. It's one of the reasons that our wool, tends to be seen as a waste product versus as a product with purpose. This is a fantastic study. If anyone, it's online, available online. But one of the primary outcomes from this was that in 1918, we actually got Canadian Cooperative Wool Growers, which was our marketing agency, one of the oldest agricultural co-ops in Canada, struggling at the moment in terms of its mandate and its capacity to market our product. But there were efforts, as I said, to do the right thing at the right time. And it was informed by experts, which doesn't always happen. And it's just to sort of close with, it's going back to this idea of valorization of our wool product. We do have this extraordinary history. We actually have garment specialty items that really we could say are unique to Ontario, and we've sort of lost a little bit of that history. The capote, which is a Métis sort of wraparound blanket, the Mackinaw jacket, even our socks, our hosiery, our tweeds were unbelievable. If you look at some of the competition lists from the 19th century, there would be like over 100 different tweeds entered in competition that were local. So we had this extraordinary diversity of product. And going back to that connection with the consumer, and where I'll leave this is, there's been some amazing work done in Norway in terms of people's connection to their wool. And out of the research, it was concluded that literally 100% of the Norwegian population owns a garment made from Norwegian wool. Now, and we're dealing with a strong wool, we're not dealing with merino, we're not dealing with next to skin softness, but we are seeing, a wool culture that is alive and vibrant and sustained, and which is also sort of being rebuilt in terms of investment with university research, new partnerships, government sponsorship, and a new energy around it. And so I see the wonderful little revivals that are happening in Europe that are often breed specific, but not necessarily. Everywhere we look, we are seeding these wonderful renaissances, if you like, in our wool industry. And I think the future is incredibly exciting, and I think it will be even more exciting if we can acknowledge our past. So I'll leave it there.
Isn't that one?
Well, that's
Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Very much enjoyed Helen's presentation, and I'm going to kind of expand on that for more today and some more of the history and handling. But yes, wool is not just a textile. It is actually a resource, and a resource that very much should be valued more than it currently is. There we go. First of all, I'd like to remind everybody that wool has a lot of carbon in it. It's 50% carbon, and a carbon cycle is something that runs our world, the entire planet. It's very important. Biogenic carbon is something that has a very short life cycle. It is the trees, it is the current kind of, it is what we currently rely on for our air, our water, our oxygen. Essentially, it's what happens no matter what. You can read that. You can do more research into it. But essentially, this carbon will persist in the atmosphere for, 1 or 2, 3, 4 lifetimes. And it just happens. Then we have kind of slow carbon. Slow carbon is kind of where we are now. This is essentially taking carbon from millions of years ago, essentially oil, dinosaurs, whatever is in the ground, and we are reintroducing it into our current carbon cycle, which essentially saturates our carbon cycle, which means the natural carbon cycle cannot absorb the carbon from 200, 400, 600 million years ago. If anybody's ever tried to supersaturate salt, eventually it just won't actually, the water won't absorb any more salt and it kills things. So that's essentially what is happening in our atmosphere because of carbon extraction from millions of years ago. So I just want you to keep that in the back of your head through all of these talks. So what exactly is wool? Globally, there's almost 2 billion kilograms of it a year that are collected. That we record, just so you know, we don't record every single thing. And I'll go into the numbers later on. It's a protein fiber made of keratin. Like our hair, it's biodegradable, breaks down naturally, has more nitrogen than cow, pig, sheep, goat, and mushroom manure or mushroom compost. 50% carbon, holds 3 times its weight in water. It doesn't catch fire under 500 degrees Celsius, and they actually have some very interesting studies, historical studies about that. Wool breaks down in water within 6 months. So if you just stick wool in water, it breaks down, doesn't create microplastics, odor resistant, removes VOCs from the air, which is volatile organic compounds. Most fibers and fabrics will do that. Just wool is extremely good at it, particularly for formaldehyde. It's hydrophilic and hydrophobic, so it actually both actively repels and absorbs water. It's a very special fiber in that way. And once again, it absorbs 3 times weight in water. And I'm sure anybody who has kind of put wool in water and lifted out, it's very, very heavy. So what do we do after it's shorn? It's classed, graded, sorted, and skirted. This is actually very interesting. Every single country has its own language, its own kind of way of doing this. Canada is different than the US, which is different than New Zealand, which is different than South Africa, which is different than Australia and the UK. And it's not a global thing. It is actually very country and regionally specific, which can be a little bit of a challenge sometimes, but essentially it's all wool. So a lot of these numbers have come from the IWTO, which is the International Wool Textile Organization. These are the numbers for 2020. What is this, 2030? I think it was 2024. But you can see right here, right in that little, about 1% of the global textile usage is of wool. Now, I said the 1.7 billion tons. That is actually what the IWTO records, which is basically 24 countries. There's a lot more than 24 countries in the world, so you could probably easily double or triple that number when you get to some of the countries that are very sheep intensive, but they aren't part of the IWTO. When we started EcoWool back in 2021, I literally got calls from people from Chile, from I got emails from Uzbekistan, from like all over the world, kind of saying, can you please process our waste wool? And these are not members of the IWTO, but they have millions of sheep on the land. So this here is, from 2022 numbers, this is what the IWTO collected. So raw wool, almost 200 billion kilograms. Down there we have what was scoured, the cleaned wool, all grades. That's 500 million kilograms. So there's approximately a 1.5 billion kilogram difference there between what's washed and what's collected. We don't know what happens to the rest of it. They don't have numbers. And then it's broken down further, interior wools, apparel wools, and then of course fine merinos. Now, from 2022, things have changed actually a lot globally for strong, long, and what are considered waste wools. So the next thing is there's a word called waste. What exactly is waste wool? To kind of back up what Helena said is there is actually no waste wool. It's wool appropriate for its end use. This is based on USDA and how they grade wool. So when you look at basically 17.5 to 22, that's some of the most beautiful fine wool. That's what most people know about. That's kind of where your merinos come in, your alpacas. That is what most of the world is aware of wool. If you say, oh, I have a wool thing, it's 9 times out of 10, it's going to be a merino something or other. And as you saw on the previous chart, merino is actually a very small portion of what's actually cleaned. Then we have our medium wools, and this is where Ontario and Canada excel. A lot of countries also excel, particularly in the northern part, the northern hemisphere. We're looking at like 22 to almost 30 microns. These are a lot of your long wools, a lot of your kind of British wool, British breeds. Then we get into the coarse, and these are excellent for carpets. You do find a lot of these coarse wools down throughout the Middle East. If you want to kind of, you're thinking about the handmade carpets that are art forms and frankly are just unparalleled anywhere in the world. That's what you're getting to there. So now you're getting into your caracals, your the milk sheep. I forget the name, but some of the big fat tail sheep that you do see in the Middle East, a lot of those have extremely coarse wool. But it does its thing. They needed it for a particular reason. So now the annual Canadian wool clip. So we annually produce approximately between 1.5 and 2 million kilograms. Many different grades, many different qualities. We have about 30,000 kilograms, about 3%, that is kind of considered a fine wool or usable, fine to low medium. That is mostly what we think of as our sweater wool. That's not an awful lot of wool. At one point, all of this would be used. Part of it because it's not now, because we don't have the infrastructure, we don't know how to use it, and it's too dirty, or that's one of our biggest problems, or it's not consistent enough. This is actually from 2012, but it hasn't changed that much. In 2012, a lot of the same infrastructure is there, and the focus on meat, frankly, and the entire world's wool flock is actually, or ewe flock is going down. So we're probably about the same. And I'll get more into what these are and what this pie chart means. So at the very top there, we have the 2B. So that is 22 to 23 microns, medium, with a length of 2.75 inches to 4 inches, 1 to 2% vegetable matter. And yeah, it's white. So that's another thing. If you're going to be doing it commercially, we need a white wool. They don't like anything else. And it's really good for outerwear and upholstery. And we produce about 300,000 kilograms. The next one for coats and carpets, 24 to 26, makes amazing blankets, going back to the Mackinac, to kind of blankets, upholstery, things like that. 3 to 4 inches, considered medium, 1 to 2%, 250,000 kilograms produced per year. Now we're getting into the really high, the 4B, the 7B, anywhere from kind of 29 to 34. Excellent for carpets. It is considered coarse. It is white. We don't have a very big carpet industry. A lot of that has been lost in Canada. We still have a little bit, but we've lost a lot of it. Then we have industrial, 23, 24. The problem is it's 2.5 and under. So that limits its processing. Industrial felt, same thing, 2.5 and under. Then we have all these others. So kind of the green is what is good about it. The red is what is bad about it. And it's those reds that often actually make it waste wool, and it ends up usually in a compost pile being burned or in a warehouse somewhere for wool growers. So once again, what actually makes waste wool, and what do all those numbers mean? It's short. So, it's under that length. It's second cut, it's been shorn twice. So it goes over, the shear goes over it once, then goes over it again. Medium to coarse. If you're making if you're trying to get a nice sweater, you probably don't want Kemp fibers, and you probably don't want something that's 29 that is making your 22 micron clip unusable. It's dirty. That's one of our biggest problems. It's matted, or also called cotted, and that can be anything from matted or felted on the sheep. Once it's shorn, it is basically comes off in a felt mat, or the ends are cotted or matted together. It's colored. If you're trying to, once again, do a full dye lot, you don't want colored wool contaminating your white wool. Has bacteria, some sort of infestation, that it actually makes the wool worse. There is a bacteria, they call it egg yolk, and it actually does make it yellow. It's kind of a canary yellow, and it doesn't come out. Excessive vegetation, also something that is really, really bad here. It's inconsistent. We do have 50 breeds. At one point, historically, we did have a more consistent breeding pattern to get an end result of the wool. Now, because of what has also come in, it's kind of just breed for what is desired for the meat, for what is desired for the system, without necessarily consideration of the wool. If you get something like a Katahdin or a Romanov, Katahdins are hair sheep, Romanovs are prolific sheep. They have gray fleeces and they tend to be quite coarse. That can ruin an entire clip. It can just ruin an entire barn just by, it's like, you never quite know what you're going to get. And your wool value has gone down and it's broken, weak, and tender. And that can be anything from nutrition to weather. Also, when a sheep gives birth, the wool stops growing for 1 day. And that is a weak spot. So if you let that grow out and it ends up in the middle of the fiber, it's now kind of useless, because if you pull it, it's going to snap. So what are we doing with our current wools here in Canada? So first of all, we're making wool pellets. Interesting. Once again, using wool in the soil is not a new thing. It basically has several thousand years of historical precedent. What else are you going to do with it? But we've now reinvented it to use different machines to go through modern day machines. Garden felt and felt products. We have very good wool for that, and we're lucky enough to have Brand Felt here in Canada. They have one of their main manufacturing plants. They also have one in the US, I think, and one in Germany, and they are one of the world's largest felt makers. Fun fact, they also are the only ones that will make piano felt. Packaging, so kind of wool is warm, wool is breathable, all that other good stuff. It makes excellent packaging for a number of different things. Bedding, once again, thousands of years of historical precedence of lying on wool. And furniture. So we are also kind of using it as upholstery and to put in, once again, the mattresses. But there are other things you can do with it. So Sheer Edge in New Zealand is actually adding it to a bioresin to basically replace fiberglass to strengthen, to make a composite. So believe it or not, that boat is actually made out of a wool resin. That chair is actually based out of the UK. It was invented by an art student, and it uses exclusively Herdwick wool. If anybody knows Herdwick wool, it's basically like putting a Brillo pad up against your skin. But it works for what the sheep needs, and it did have a use, but it's really good for that. And Sheer Edge, again, the knife handle. If you kind of think about all the different things that you use that have plastic handles, anything that we're sitting on, if you kind of look at the chairs here, they're all kind of some sort of resin or polycarbonate composite. Why can't we make that out of wool? Something that is also being used is it's a building material. They have actually added wool into concrete, and I know nothing about concrete or building or anything like that. So, but this is what it does actually borne out, is it actually increases flexural strength, split tensile strength, and compressive strength, increases thermal regulation, actually better workability. So it's a very interesting way of using some sort of wool that normally wouldn't be used anymore. And what is interesting, by dipping it in salt water, can withstand more compressive and flexural strength compared to ordinary Portland cement. So that means both the East Coast and the West Coast, where salt water does tend to wear down and erode a lot of things, wool is actually stronger than standard cement. Okay, so we also use it we can break it down chemically. We can use it for air filters. This is actually one of the lowest bars we have, but because we don't have a lot of funding into this, it's literally air filters for both restaurants, homes, and factories. Acoustic panel, once again, it quietens things. Why are we using PET plastic? Most of what you find out there for most felt that's made is actually PET plastic. It actually has made a battery, which is really interesting. And of course, most recently, it is now used as a biomaterial for bone growth, which also, when you kind of look back, it's like, well, duh. And there's a lot of other uses. So kind of, and I'll get into this as community sported yarn, but I've got to go. If you want to talk about that, come talk to me afterwards. But it is something that when you're dealing with materials that are not consistent, hands are often a better way of dealing with that than machines are. Some of the things that I think are needed here in Canada and probably other parts of the world as well. So thank you for making my wool useful. That's Neville Lambottom, who has awful wool, but he's an awfully sweet guy. So thank you very much.
It's virtual as well, so sounds good. All right. Thank you so much to our first presenters. That gives everybody a really good idea of what we're dealing with in Ontario, what we've been through, and then some really good information about wool's properties and potential uses. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of background on me. My name's Lindsay. I'm from London area, so about an hour away from Guelph here. We are in a really interesting area here in Southwestern Ontario. We can go about 2 to 3 hours in every direction and really hit all of our core manufacturing, which is an interesting area to be in. Some things I'm going to talk about during the presentation is creating some connections between our local farming and manufacturing. I also have a really big passion for creative solutions, which follows into what I do for work. Why wool? I'll get into why I chose wool and how that really unfolded for me, as well as where we're going in the future in terms of research, collaboration, and the future of my company, Woolgrown, which I'll get into. Okay, so I have agricultural roots and very entrepreneurial family background. So my grandparents were farmers. They immigrated here. They started with dairy and really went through all of the stages of farming, never really wanted to retire. So they went from dairy to beef to pigs. And when I was a kid, they were already running a decent flock size of sheep. So I had a ton of time growing up with them. My parents were also entrepreneurs, so they were working a lot. So I spent a lot of time on the farm and really helping my Opa with the sheep, taking them to market, all of those things. And it was something that was always in the back of my mind. I would see them being shorn, but never really think about where that wool was going, what it was being used for. It was just something that happened on the farm. When I had the opportunity to go back to the farm, that was one of the things that I really wanted to get, was sheep. I had some pasture area, and when I got the sheep, figured, what do I do with all this wool? So that's really how things started. I also have a background in business marketing, and then I'm a graduate of Guelph University with a BA in International Development. I really tailored my programming to connect these areas of agriculture and also manufacturing. Seeing the opportunities that were there that could be, tied together was something that was always in the back of my mind of things that could be done in terms of like maybe market gardening or markets for fresh food, produce, that kind of thing. But again, it wasn't really till I got the sheep that I looked into that more. And like I said, Ontario accounts for 45% of the country's manufacturing output. So there's a lot of industry in this area, and not even just wool specific or related. There's a ton of crossover and interesting things that we can get into based on what's around. So looking at some of the problems that we've already touched upon in terms of wool coarseness, quality of wool, the clip, that sort of thing, there's a lot of challenges, but there's also opportunity if we try and think outside of the box and what can we do in there. I also had a lot of hands-on experience with the wool, experimenting from my own flock and from others and seeing what could we do with this. I wasn't aware of wool being used in gardening and growing until our own flock. And being a gardener, very much an experimental gardener, I've used tons of different mulches to see what would work. Weed suppression was something that I was always struggling with. There's only so much time in the day and only so much time to weed. So that was something that wool came into my life and really changed. And then also the natural materials that really weren't available as an option in that growing and gardening space. Okay, so Jennifer really touched on all of the great benefits of wool, the biodegradable aspect of it. It's completely natural. It retains quite a bit of moisture. It felts together quite easy for a good weed suppression barrier. And as well, it's always slowly releasing nitrogen, and then it has some temperature regulation properties as well. So all of those things coupled together is what we worked on either at our place to really research how it was going to work and what we could do in terms of production capacity, where an entry barrier would be, what could we do. So we started looking at either like the washed wool, raw wool forms, pelletizing. We've been able to do some pelletizing and getting that online in terms of some distribution in Canada. They're currently being in Lee Valley right now, as well as another American business that has taken on some of our felt and pellets. So it's really getting into that more of a common understanding that pellets and wool can be used in these ways in gardening and growing. And then as well as with that research, so Wool Grown, like I said, creates the pellets. We use a loose wool mulch, but our main one is a felted wool, really using medium and coarse wools, which have a lot of either abnormalities in the fleece, some kemp, some hair. So kind of blending some different materials, different farm flocks together to really be able to expand what could be used in terms of that felt. So that's an ongoing process, and it's really looking about collaborating with local farms, local larger and medium-sized flocks to see what we can use and how that works in our current production. So we're also developing relationships through our supply chains, especially with farmers. And that's always a challenge to source materials at scale. So looking at different size of flocks and what they offer and how we can use that. Can it be tailored to our felt, or is it more on a pellet application, depending on the quality? And then we've really had some good opportunities with Helen's help. I have been doing some research projects with Ecological Farmers of Ontario currently, which is wrapping up this year, using our felt mats along with a raw wool and a hemp product made out west. We're looking at how those are being used, how that's coming out season over season in these trial plot areas. And we've seen some really, really good positive response from these trial areas. The felt is really lasting as long as it's on top of the soil. As soon as we incorporate chips and more organic matter on top, of course, that's going to increase that degradation and that decomposition. But on top of the surface and even under those surfaces, it's holding that moisture. It's creating almost its own barrier against the weeds to come through, and then it's composting back into that soil to add more organic matter. And then so engaging other industry partners as well to see where sourcing can go and how other flocks can be involved and expand our practical product reach and having that real world experience and feedback. So one of the main things continuing for Wool Grown, our business, is these field trials and the feedback that I get from customers based on how they're using the product in their growing environments, what it needs to accomplish, and is it hitting those marks. And we've had really positive experience and feedback based on those areas so far. And then we're constantly exploring alternative ways in which we can use the wool. So in everyday products. Some of the products that Jennifer brought up is those plastic composite alternatives. And that's really how Wool Grown started for me. Was, like I said, I was an experimental gardener. I really didn't want to use your polyplaque landscape fabric. It doesn't hold up. It really makes a mess at the end of its use. It's microplastics and little pieces that you can never get out of the soil. So I was constantly searching, like, what else can I use? I've used cardboard, I've used deeper beds of mulch and chips and wood chips, that kind of thing. And really tailoring the wool and what it can do in those areas has made a huge difference. Just in my own landscape and gardening areas, market garden area, like I can see the difference of how much time I'm spending, how much moisture it's retaining, especially for heavy feeding crops. Having that good base of wool there has really improved what we're seeing. So repurposing it creatively and continuing to develop those areas has been something that I find a lot of joy in, and being able to see it come from just an idea into something that we were able to create at scale. That was something that was really important. Being in the Southwestern Ontario area, we still have production capacity where we can do these larger runs. So that has been pretty positive. And then, of course, promoting the sustainability of what we're creating and how it can be used season over season. So that's me, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.
Quite possible, actually. So I have a problem because I am actually a loud talker, so I'll try not to hold my too close. I also want to say that unlike my amazing colleagues here, my visual presentation means nothing. It's just there for visual interest. So I'll be forwarding as I go, and it's really just so you have something to look at that's not me. My name is Melinda Ramsey. A lot of people know me as Mel. I feel very honored to have been asked to speak here, and I'm so happy to be sharing the stage with these women who are doing such amazing things and are an inspiration to so many and so smart. So I hope I'm not the weak link on this panel. I also have a vision problem that I'm sure many of you in my generation might experience, which is I can't see far or close without my glasses, so it's all good. So I'll just go forward to pictures. Okay, so I just wanted, before I start my presentation, and I'm going to rely on Helen to time me because I kept going over in all of my test deliveries. So I wanted to contextualize what some of the things that I'll be talking about. I am an equal opportunity fiber supporter. So when, even though the topic here is reimagining the wool industry, I will be talking about fiber generally because I do believe that alpaca and mohair and angora do have a role to play in the discussion. I operate in a world of more on a community based, unlike Jennifer and Lindsay certainly, but also Helen, who's in an academic sphere. I'm in a much more not one-on-one, but I'm on a more community level, a little bit more personal relationship level. So my perception of industry is very different than, say, Jennifer or Lindsay's, who are talking about manufacturing and commercial development and that sort of thing. So that kind of is a bit tempering of my talk. And I also wanted to say that in my mind, I have a very line on one side, not on one side, but I have a definition of fiber farmers being farms that are focused primarily on growing fiber, where the focus on breeding and feeding and husbandry is based on fiber, and where the production of meat is maybe a secondary focus, if at all. And then we have our cousins, the commercial sheep farmers, and those farms are focused a lot more on meat and breeding stock production, and wool, if anything, is a secondary consideration for all the reasons that everybody's been talking about, because right now it has no economic value for them, so there's not a lot of motivation for them to consider fiber. So then there are farms that work in the mid-ground of that sphere, For those of you that went to see Romy yesterday, or anybody that knows Topsy Farm in Kingston, those are large operations that have a significant clip annually, but are doing a lot of fiber things alongside of their meat production. And in the mid-range, we have farms like Jennifer's Farm, which has always had a very holistic approach. So meat and dairy production alongside of a robust fiber production. But I would say that generally in Ontario, our farms are really situated in one group or another group. So I just wanted to say those things before I started so you could see where I was coming from. I'm at one half of Lickety Spit Fiber Farm. We are a farm located south of Hamilton, so about an hour and a half south of here, for those of you that are not from Ontario. We have a flock of about 40 sheep, half of which are purebred Icelandic, the other half that are longer wool breeds, so Romney, Rambouillet, and Corriedale genetics. We also have a herd of 20 alpacas. And our farm focuses primarily on fiber production, although we do sell lambs to the market. And so we sell raw fleece, we have yarn, roving, and bats and rug yarn made at local Ontario mills. We do have some fiber-related value-added goods produced, but for the most part, we are producing materials for spinners and weavers and knitters and crocheters to use, and we are, passionate about educating people about how amazing natural fibers are. So we sell our products for us, we are selling our products more on a community level. We sell at fiber markets and arts and craft shows, Christmas markets, agricultural events, and we do have some on-farm events. So we're very much working with our consumers. And as we sell our products to our consumers, we're always trying to advocate for the benefits of wool and other natural fibers, and why people should really take note of those products. Oh, I'll follow this. Oh, new photo. That's almost related. Look at that timing. So I would say that our farm is very representative of fiber farms in Ontario. We have a small holding, so under 100 acres. We have a small to medium flock herd size, which again would be under about 100 head. We are female-led, and we know anecdotally that predominantly, at least in Ontario, most of the fiber farms are spearheaded by women. And we are, by necessity, producing on a small batch scale. And so when I say a small batch scale, there are a few challenges that fiber farmers have in Ontario, which I'm sure are actually problems really around the world, but we have different problems somewhat than our commercial cousins. And one of those things is access to milling time. So fiber production like yarn and roving and fleece and all those things on a small batch scale is actually very labor intensive. So you have your farming operation, you're raising sheep and you're lambing and you're getting hay and you're planting things, and then you're having babies, and then you shear. And then after you shear, you have all this fleece. And generally speaking, often the fleece can be quite dirty because our climate requires us to house our animals inside more often than not. There are some farms that are the exception, but generally speaking in Ontario, we do make a lot of use of barns in the wintertime. So the sheep are in the barns, they're getting dirty, vegetative matter is falling on them, they're rubbing up against things, they're felting. So by the time your sheep are sheared, you have a lot of work to do to separate the good from the bad. Then you're going to drive to the mill once your milling schedule comes up. You're going to wait for your milling time to finish and your product to be made. You're going to drive back to the mill. Then you're going to bring it back. Then you're going to wash. You're going to dry. You're going to dye. You're going to label. And then you're going to sell your yarn. So a lot of time has gone by and a lot of effort has gone into it. And that effort also translates into a restriction on how much you can possibly send to the mill, because there's only so many hours in a day when you're also doing your other things and maybe raising children or caring for, parents or whatever people are doing in their life. So you are often only sending a portion of your clip at a time. So when you get your stuff back from the mill, it's by definition small batch, because you're really only getting 10, 20, 30, 40 skeins of yarn or maybe a bag of roving. And so what that means for the fiber farmer is it's very hard to scale up and sell on a wholesale kind of level, right? So, and being able to wholesale would mean the farm would have consistent income, reliable income. People would be able to go to their local yarn store and get locally produced yarn. Like, it would be a win for everybody. But the reality for the fiber farmers is that reaching that level is actually very, very challenging. And so it's challenging also because even if we had the time to produce, like, get all of our wool set ready and sent to the mills themselves don't actually have time to process it because there's such high demand for milling time, and there are so few mills in Ontario. And Wave is one of the few people that actually, for those of you that saw Wave's presentation yesterday, she's one of the few mills in Ontario that will take 50 pounds or more. Like, everybody else is a mini or small mill scale. So they're really not interested in you bringing 50 pounds because there's 40 people behind you that are waiting to get their stuff done as well. So it's very challenging for us to scale up. So, and those are like real challenges, but some of the benefits for not being able to scale up and keeping our industry, the yarn industry, a little bit more locally focused is that my clip changes every year. Everybody that has fiber animals, their clip changes every year. So the sheep and alpacas and, goats and whatever animal we're talking about, every year their fleece changes. They age, they have babies, they have good days and bad days, they have stress, they have good weather, bad weather. So when I make yarn from Mopsy's fleece this year, that yarn is not the same as the yarn I made from Mopsy last year. So when people come to me and say, can I buy sweater quantity of your Mopsy yarn? I say, you better buy more than sweater quantity because that yarn will never be produced again. If for the people that have commercial flocks and they put in, 100, 200, 300 fleeces and they can send 500 pounds off to the mills, the consistency is better because the characteristics are basically, combined over that many fleeces, where I'm only adding maybe 2 or 3 animals to one batch to make some yarn. So the difference in one of those fleeces is going to impact the end use. And I would say that for hand makers like weavers or spinners, that's also a consideration because you're going to see somebody might produce, and this is like the colorway that, you love this colorway and you buy it from me this year, but next year that colorway may very well come from a different batch, right? So the spin or, the end use might be a little bit different. So that is, somewhat of a challenge, but there is something really great about it because you are talking to people when they buy our yarn and explaining to people about the life cycle of a sheep, explaining how fiber works, and that is a living, breathing thing that is not static, that it reflects its land, its time, its, the weather, how you care for it, all of that, right? The problem is, so Helen's gonna actually really have to time me up because as soon as I start talking about sheep, like all bets are off. It's actually kind of a problem. But, and I gotta fast go forward. Oh yeah. Oh, look, and sheep on my farm. Okay, so I'm also because I can't see, I'm actually not really using my notes. I should have bigger cue cards or something. So the topic of how reimagining the wool industry in Ontario. So some of those challenges are, they're challenges that we would like to address if we were to move forward to having a more robust Ontario wool system. So I'm sure that all of you and everybody that is a hand maker of some kind would love to be able to go into your local yarn shop or be some commercial enterprise and be able to buy locally produced products. And right now that's not realistic because we don't have the infrastructure for that. We don't have the milling, we don't have the washing, we don't have the scouring. And so it's also what we do have tends to be fairly expensive. And the mills do an amazing job, but the demand far, far outstrips what they're able to provide. They just can't keep up. So we have the struggle of capacity. We have the struggle of our climate, which is, something that we can't actually do anything about. And we also have the struggle of labor. Again, we can't really do much about it. But what we do have is the opportunity, if we're going to reimagine the wool industry, we have the opportunity to educate both the producer and the consumer. And the producer needs to be educated so that they understand what, as Jennifer was talking about, like every breed of sheep has certain characteristics, and some characteristics between breeds can be similar, but they can also be vastly different. And for producers to be able to provide the consumer with a good product, they have to understand what they have. And one of the problems we have in Ontario is that at one time we would have had, I mean, Helen talks about 50 breeds, and yes, at one time we had 50 breeds. But now because of the economics of producing meat, many of the commercial farmers are having, let's say, down breeds, which for any of you who are spinners know, like the qualities of down, or a knitter, if any of you are knitters, you know what the quality of down is as a product. But then they want to accelerate their lambing, or they want more lambs, more prolific mothering. They want better mothering instincts. They want a quicker conversion of feed to carcass. And those are all economic needs. They need to pay the mortgages on their farm, pay for their tractor loans, put their kids through school. Their farming is hard. And so they have to make decisions based on their bottom line. Unfortunately, those bottom line decisions rarely mean good wool. Like every once in a while, you'll get somebody bring in a thin sheep and you'll be like, oh, that's good wool. But sometimes they bring in like totally the wrong sheep, like a hair sheep. And then that wool is like not for you all, not really usable, but for those people that are making commercial and more industrial products, that wool is fine. That would be considered, waste wool. So we do need to try to educate the producers. And this is, as Helen suggested, that my big thing though is educating the consumer. So I feel that the only way for us to really, I better go forward because I'm like really behind on the slides, right? Not that it matters, but so in order for us to have a future where we have got made in Ontario or made in Canada, or for many of you are from elsewhere. So this all relates to wherever you come from. If we wanted a locally produced product, the consumer is the actual like base need that we have. We need to educate people about why they want to use wool or other fiber products. All of the characteristics that Jennifer's presentation talked about, its wicking properties, fire retardant properties, all of those things make it an amazing product for people to wear. It's comfortable, year round. And on top of that, it is absolutely part of the equation for the climate crisis. Without a doubt, humanity, I am a firm believer that the only reason that our species is still around today is because we domesticated sheep more than 10,000 years ago. Because honestly, without sheep, even better than dogs, right? Like really. And so I think that we have to look at that. And our current generation, and when I say generation, I mean our point in time, is like the bridge between the time of industrialization where we were told, especially women folk, were told, you don't need to knit anymore. You don't need to sew anymore. You've got advancements in technology and industry that's going to do all this menial work for you. And buy plastics. Like let's use Gore-Tex because Gore-Tex is amazing. Let's use your polyester. For anyone here who's gone through menopause, polyester is the devil. Like I'm just telling you right now. So we need to have the conversations with people. So one of the things that I do, I do a lot of events. I organize things. I do agricultural education through my fair and stuff. And I do organize Land Made, which is like a, frontline, education and introduction to farming event. But I also think we all need to be bulletin boards and very out there and vocal about our belief in natural fibers. And so, I encourage you all to wear your hand spun and to wear the textiles that you're weaving and, all of that. But I also encourage you to go a step further and to encourage your friends and family to support businesses that actually produce products that are made out of wool. And that's like, in Canada, we have Big Bill and Stanfield, and we have Anion, companies that are St. Mark Scott, like companies that are producing textile with, wool. Again, is it mostly Canadian? Probably not. However, they are producing in Canada products in the United States. For those of you that are from the United States, I mean, you've got so many options of national companies that are producing clothing that is, made from wool. And it's expensive, but it will last you forever. It's your pushback against fast fashion. It's your pushback against the oil and the plastic industry. It makes you feel better. Again, for those of us through menopause, it's amazing. And, I would take it one step further. Like, I have my Stegman clogs on, fashionable, functional, and comfortable. You're bedding, your household goods, and you don't even have to go so far as like, oh, I'm going to spend $2,000 on a wool couch, although I do recommend you do, because I've seen one at work and it's like amazing. But but you do the best you can, and then you spread the word, like a bit like the fiber cult. You just like spread the word to your friends and family, and you buy them their smart wool socks for Christmas, and you share the awesomeness, right, of that fiber. Because once industry sees the demand, once the consumers start driving the demand, then there is the interest in investment, and there is the interest in like developing infrastructure. And then once we get the infrastructure, then the farmers say, okay, so I am going to get value for my wool. So maybe now I'm not going to like, oh yeah, see, I gotta go. Now I'm not going to do my weird crossbreeding, because I'm going to get money for my wool, and I'm going to treat my wool as a valuable commodity and not just like burn it. If you knew how much wool got burned and composted on farm, you would all weep. It's just horrible. Anyway, these are events I do. Facts. So anyway, the slides mean nothing. So I just want to say that reimagining the wool industry, whether it's in Ontario or it's anyone else, is actually all of us. Like, we are the reimagining and the next generation. And when I say the next generation, I'm not talking chronologically like, oh, the young people, but I just mean we are bridging, we are redeveloping the skills and the knowledge that was lost with industrialization, like the 1950s and 60s. And so, we're bridging. And so hopefully that next generation is going to take us to a place where we have locally produced fiber, and we have, sustainable economies that support farmers, but also really, really support people, because we should all be wearing wool and alpaca. I mean, the mohair and the Angora, like that's, But anyway, thank you. That's me. So I think that we're done. And so I think that the idea was that you're more than welcome to ask questions, but just maybe ask the person specifically that you had the question directed at. And if it's a general question, I mean, somebody will answer it, because we're all pretty passionate. So thank you. Thanks for having me. Oh, you want this, because we're going to answer the questions. Sorry that it's long.
Time for 2 questions. Anyone? Yeah.
I'm Jackie. I should mention also thank you. Great.
Question.
It sounds like you have a lot of opinions on merino wool, and I would like to hear what they are, because I also have a lot of opinions on merino. If you have any thoughts, would you share them?
For who's that?
Anybody.
Oh, I'm gonna.
Yeah.
We all have to
Stay here, right?
Yeah.
I'll just repeat.
Yeah, the question is, it seems as though they have opinions on merino, and what would they be?
There was some extremely strong opinions on merino wool in the 19th century, and basically merino was seen as exotic, racy, flighty, unreliable, cultural characteristics that did not align with British colonial settlers. identified with the French and Spanish. So the merino did not find favor culturally, and therefore it didn't thrive in Ontario either, so that didn't help either. So there were merinos here, they did not survive the crossbreeding, they did not survive the climate. They were disparaged. And red them was seen as sneaky because the weight of the merino wool was really sort of heavy, and then once it was scoured, of course, it was super light, and they kept winning at these competitions. And Ontario farmers did not like that.
You want Jennifer go for next?
Hey guys, our speakers, would you come this way just a bit, so the camera will,
That's
good. Yeah, right there.
So some of my opinions about merino actually have more to do with modern, but it does some reach kind of back into history. Oh, sorry. There we go. Can you hear me? I also just, I'm also can be very loud, so I don't want to hurt anybody's ears. Yeah, it has more to do with kind of modern day, partially because everybody just wants merino. They've done a great job of marketing. I do envy their marketing. It's not their bad sheep. It's not their bad wool. Where we live, they don't really work well. They prefer dry climates. We have some Rambouillet here, which, is merino. They just don't fit here. The other thing is, I'm trying to be diplomatic. The other thing is, a lot of it is superwash. So it's kind of somewhat disingenuous. Going back to the sneaky bit, although it has more to do with marketing than it does with cultural faces. So yeah, it has more to do with that. It's just, it has been so overwhelming. If you have a natural fiber, it's merino, but it does have its place. Like from a positive point, it has its place. And frankly, if you want to have something next to your skin, that's probably what you're going to have. Having said that, it also depends on the processing, because I have actually bought, when I was down doing the Fiber Shed conference years ago, I bought some merino from California, and it was awful. It was awful. So it can also do with the processing, and long wools can rival some of the softest merinos just due to the milling. So I think it's kind of, it's a fleece job.
So we do have some merino genetics that we inherited from somebody who was dispersing her flock, and they are somewhat flighty. They are Lorraine sheep. They don't, they want to run. They're not, I used to be very anti superwash. I still really do believe that we do not need to resort to superwash. However, I've met enough young, and I'm just saying moms, because this is generally like who's doing the baby buying and the washing at home, which is not to say men don't, but predominantly my experience has been with young moms who are not interested in having wool products for their baby stuff, because they do think it's going to shrink, it's harder to wash, it's all of that. And so until you can convince them that, until we can create a marketing plan for down products made with down breeds, which doesn't felt, we are, at least if it's a superwash merino product, they are at least supporting a farm somewhere. They are supporting an industry and a heritage somewhere. Ideally, yes, we would wean everybody off of superwash, but which I think is what people think of when they think of merino. They're thinking of like, oh, my Patagonia like top that I can throw in the washing machine after I go running. So I feel like it's not great, but at least it's not polyester, or at least it's something that is somehow keeping our industry somewhat going. Do you want to share your opinions about merino?
It's from textile wool, talking about breeding practices and how problematic they can be for genetic modification.
Oh, so she said that she just remembered from textile school learning that with the merino, there can be a lot of like sketchy breeding practices and genetic modification. Yeah, and I think they're also really like a hotspot to the idea of mulesing, like, and that is a reality also. So as somebody, we have Ramblay genetics. So our farm, the yarn that we produce, we try not to have off-farm inputs. So we're trying not to like use bamboo and silk and all of those things. So we work towards sheep fleece that might be compatible with alpaca, which if you know alpaca, not alpacas are fine, and alpacas doesn't grow long, and so we have some goals for our crossbreeding. So we do have some Ramblay genetics, which I thought maybe would bring back our Romney genetics, make it shorter. It didn't work, but shearing them is challenging. They have foot problems because, again, as Jennifer says, they really want to be in a different climate. And I'm totally, for the record, against mulesing, but I can see why farms went into that, because with all those wrinkles, the husbandry has to be spot on. And if you've got like 10,000 sheep out on the range that you see once a year, like I could see why they thought it was a good idea at the time. Thankfully, we know better now, but.
Also, museling does not happen in North America.
Yeah.
It is actually very much specific to there.
Yeah.
And if you've ever seen or dealt with fly strike, suddenly it's like, oh,
Yeah.
that's why.
Yes.
So, and I won't explain fly strike, look it up.
Yeah. Yeah. You have an opinion about Marina?
Yeah.
Yes, but do you want me to bring you the microphone so you can announce?
No, just repeat what I say. All of you women have given wonderful information to us. But I'm wondering if this is considered women's work. Are there men who are doing the same kind of things you're doing?
Yeah. Who wants to?
What's your?
The question is, obviously all of us are women, and so the question was, is this considered to be women's work? And I guess I'll go first, because as I mentioned in my presentation, by and large, the fiber farms, at least in Ontario, and I suspect probably mostly in North America, we also deal with Peruvian farmers of alpaca, and they are almost invariably women-led. And which is not to say that there aren't some men. And like, for example, Jennifer's partner is involved in the operation. Like, there are men that are involved, but I mean, I guess in this generation, Helen might have insight into, the earlier wool industry, but typically it would be women that are spearheading it. But which is not to say it's women's work, but I feel that at this moment right now, we have maybe more interest in the value of it, and that it is, once upon a time, the spinners were spinsters, like we have a history as women of like actually doing textile work outside of the guild system. So, but I bet you Helen's got something to say.
Very briefly, it was a cottage industry in Upper Canada, which then became Ontario. Scottish settlers had large families, and child labor was very much, part of the wool culture. And as soon as the mills started getting bigger and moved to industrial scale, it became men's work, with cheese making as well. So there's a whole pattern there of, as it becomes important and economically significant, women are eclipsed and erased from
History.
Yes, actually, and so when Fiber Shed started, so Ontario, which when it started was Upper Canada Fiber Shed. It was the first international Fiber Shed affiliate. So I was the farmer founder. When I started speaking to our Ontario sheep farmer districts, I would go to their meetings. I would kind of say, wool is such a cool thing. It was always the women that kind of went, oh, really? They were the ones that perked up. They were the ones that were interested. The men generally weren't. Basically, yes, the women proved it out, then the men were interested. And the other one was beer. Actually, that was beer making was actually something that.
And that happened at our wool convention a few years back.
Yes.
Demonstrating skirting.
Yes.
And
yes.
the men only came to the skirting table when
Yes.
The raiders from wool growers came
Yes.
over who were men.
Yes.
Otherwise, they stayed at the opposite end of the bridge.
So yes, yeah, I would say that in a lot of ways, yeah, it is actually. There could be some historical precedent as well, because often it's the women, because we have smaller hands, we actually can go into, we do lambing a lot better. There are some things we are just innately better at for some reason than the men are, but the men don't always like to recognize that. But if you want to see something very interesting, there was something in the UK, it was called Lambing Live. It was literally a show that would run every year. And for about a week, they would like record a farm lambing. And it was the top show in the country at that point. And usually it was the women doing the lambing. So yeah.
Small hands.
Yeah. And yeah. So yeah. Any other? Yeah. Great question. I like that.
I think you're on.
Okay. Yeah, so. Again, this has been it's amazing to me at the end of these always that it's only been a couple of days because we're all exhausted. And been really wonderful. So my job right now is closing remarks and final stuff, and I would love to hear from every one of you, but there isn't time for that. But what I do hope, since we've been talking about changes we're making and adjustments we're making in work in general, because it's time for us to do that, and it's an exciting time. I hope that you will write to us, to the board members, to info@regrow, which goes to Elena, but she'll pass it on to any of us that you know or don't know, and tell us what you're thinking beyond just what we got today, because that was a great start, but we need more. And I, for one, want to know what would you like? What would be the ideal annual meeting for you, or annual gathering? And you don't need to tell me now, and because you need to think about it anyway. And I can promise you right now, we can't make everybody happy all the time. It's not possible within 4 days. So do you want it to be 7 days, or do you want it to be only 2 days? And do you want it to be easy to get to, or do you want it to be most interesting to get to? And one of the things that we struggle with is how to keep it affordable, because we don't want it to be exclusive. On the other hand, what I keep trying to point out, and I learned this from the people at HTA when they were working with conversions, we've gotten too big to stay cheap. We used to be 35 people would come to these, and we had venue options all over. We went church camps were the best. We can't go to church camps anymore because they only take up to 40 people. So do we cut it down to smaller so that it's less expensive? Then will you guys stay home so that people who can afford it then can come? Or, I mean, there's just lots of questions we're working on, trying to make it work the best way possible. And so send me or anybody else on the board your input, and we will, I promise, take it into account. Whether or not we land it with you, we'll see. But we've got a lot of factors there. Let me see. I wrote these notes. I'm so happy that we've been here in Canada this week, and I think all of you are all for the same reasons we're trying to think of how to not be in the United States next year also. And so we've had ideas like Mexico, which is a great idea, or being on the US border. The thing is, we need to have a group of on the ground people wherever we go. So here we have 3 Canadians on the committee. One of them lives right near here and knows this neighborhood, right? And if we went to, for instance, Las Cruces, New Mexico, right on the border, we've got Christine Eber and her crowd there, who I'm sure would be thrilled to have us come. And there are other places, Tucson, where we've got Artists Beyond Borders. I mean, there are lots of interesting places we're thinking about. So, send us your ideas for that also. And, part of what I've loved is and keep loving, is the wide range of interests that there are in this group now. So even though I don't remember anybody, maybe, talking about the farms they're working on, but we're really interested in all of this stuff, because I don't know about all the rest of you, but the sheep situation in Guatemala is pretty sad. And I would love to have the four of you just come down and revamp the sheep situation in Guatemala, you know, and we've talked about that. Where's Nancy Weidrich? She was on my case for a long time to solve the sheep problem in Guatemala, which is a little beyond me. But there's a lot of potential if there are a lot of sheep there, and you know. It's also been really good, and another person said to me several times, who's been to several meetings, that they feel like this time all of you are talking more about connections than ever before. People are talking about the connections they're making on a social basis, on a one-on-one basis, on a group basis, on a, oh, I'm really interested in that project basis, but people have been talking about connections and connections and connections, which of course is what we want and what we're all about. So that's very exciting. And okay. The basket was a great idea, except that it doesn't take into account the fact that nobody has cash right now. So one of the things that we want to do is, Hetty, raise your hand, please. Hetty has agreed to let her bank account be used to send money to by Venmo or whatever you want. And she will put it all together and then send to the baby fund a chunk all at once. And Hetty, I don't want to put your Venmo account out over virtual. That doesn't seem very safe to me. So we have the number here. We can give it to any of you who want it. And if you think of it later, this obviously doesn't have to be done right now. If you think of it later, then you can write to Hetty and she can send you the information. It just doesn't seem like, since this is going to go on to YouTube, it doesn't seem very smart to me. So we want you to be able to kick into the baby fund, baby shower. And the last thing I want to say is that I used to, back in the early days, when we were only 30 people, we all knew each other. Everybody knew everybody who was coming to the meetings because there were so few of us. And you just can hardly imagine what a thrill it is to me to be here and only know half of you when you come in the door. It's like, wow, new people, and new people, and new people, and this is really exciting. And people, I think that you're excited too, because most of you are coming and meeting new people, as well as seeing old friends, which is pretty great, pretty darn great. And when Lauren said it was a revelation to her to realize that she had as many friends in the US as she did in the other side of the world, because they're all work people, it's like, yeah, I've got shivers. So I like that. And somebody said that I want to give the last word. And I said, at the time I had a voice. And I said, sure, it gives me the chance to have the last word. And my last word at the time, immediately I thought was, go forth and be nice. That's all I would do, you know? It doesn't mean we'll have to agree with everything everybody says, because that's never going to happen unless you're really boring. But there are ways to disagree in a civil manner. There are ways to get changes that we want without having to go to war. And so that's what I told the therapist a long time ago. She said, what do you want out of life? I said, I just want everybody to be nice to everybody. Is that too much to ask? Evidently it is, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So that's right. If anybody can, You guys can. So, that's my last word, which I hope you'll take with you.